Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Tonight we examine a photograph that defies explanation, a relic from the mining towns of 1886, when men descended into the Earth's depths with little more than pickaxes, lanterns, and raw determination. The photograph appears unremarkable at first glance. A sepia-toned image showing 8 miners standing shoulder to shoulder outside a mine shaft. Their faces are stern, weathered by sun and coal dust. They wear the standard attire of the era: canvas pants, heavy boots, suspenders, and cloth caps. Some hold pickaxes while others grasp lanterns. Their expressions are stoic, unsmiling, as was common in photographs of that period when exposure times required subjects to remain perfectly still. The original photograph sat forgotten in the archives of the Coleridge Historical Society for decades. It was labeled simply Western Mining Crew, 1886, with no names or specific location noted. When digital enhancement techniques were applied to restore the fading image, something inexplicable emerged, something that contradicts everything we understand about photography and perhaps life itself. Under enhanced magnification and specialized light filters, forensic photography experts discovered the impossible. None of these men were alive when this photograph was taken. The evidence is subtle but undeniable. The enhanced images reveal that each miner's eyes lack any light reflection, instead showing the clouded, fixed dilation associated with death. More disturbing still, careful examination shows that several of the men bear fatal injuries carefully concealed by their positioning. A crushed skull hidden by a cap, a severed throat obscured by shadow, a caved-in chest masked by crossed arms. Yet they stand upright. They hold tools. They form a perfect line. The photographer who captured this image remains unknown. No record exists of how these deceased men were arranged in such lifelike poses, or why anyone would create such a macabre tableau. Mining accidents were tragically common in the 1880s, but no single disaster matching the apparent deaths of these 8 men appears in local records. Some theorize that the photograph might represent a bizarre memorial practice unknown to modern historians. Perhaps the men died in separate incidents and were posed together as a final tribute to their brotherhood. Others suggest more sinister possibilities, that the photographer himself was responsible for their deaths, or that something supernatural allowed these men one final moment of dignity before their souls departed. Most disturbing is the background detail revealed only through enhancement. The mine entrance behind them shows evidence of a cave-in that would have made the photograph impossible to take after the accident occurred. This raises the chilling question: if the mine had already collapsed and these men were already dead, who or what arranged them for this final portrait? And why do enhanced scans reveal a 9th figure, barely visible in the mine's shadowy entrance, appearing to beckon the dead miners back into the darkness? The photograph found its way to our investigative team through a circuitous path. The great-grandson of the Coleridge Historical Society's founder discovered it while clearing out his deceased grandmother's attic in 2018. He nearly discarded the brittle, water-damaged box containing it, but something, intuition perhaps, made him pause and examine its contents. After digital restoration revealed the anomalies, 3 separate photographic experts were consulted, each working independently without knowledge of the other's findings. All 3 reached identical conclusions. The subjects were deceased at the time of exposure. "I've examined thousands of historical photographs," explains Dr. Eleanor Werner, forensic photography specialist at Eastern State University. "The evidence is unmistakable. The positioning of the limbs shows subtle signs of rigor mortis being manipulated. Someone arranged these bodies with extraordinary care." Records from the era indicate the Coleridge region experienced what locals called the Winter of Sorrows, between 1885 and 1886. 6 separate mining accidents claimed 23 lives across 3 counties. Newspaper accounts describe communities devastated by loss, with some families losing multiple sons and fathers within weeks. What makes this particular case perplexing is that we've identified the mine entrance as belonging to the Mercy Shaft, part of the Harlan Coal Company's operations. According to county records, this particular mine experienced a catastrophic collapse on February 3, 1886, trapping 11 miners. Only 3 bodies were officially recovered. Mining companies of that era were notorious for minimizing disasters, explains mining historian Thomas Blackwell. They often underreported casualties and rushed to resume operations without proper recovery efforts. The families of those lost in the depths rarely received closure, let alone compensation. This context raises a disturbing possibility. Could this photograph represent an act of defiance? Perhaps someone, a fellow miner or grieving family member, recovered these bodies in secret and created this macabre portrait as testimony to the true cost of coal. The ninth figure, visible only through specialized ultraviolet filtering, adds another layer to this mystery. Enhanced magnification reveals it to be taller than the miners, with proportions that seem slightly elongated. Its face remains obscured by shadow, but witnesses who've studied the enhanced image report feeling an immediate aversion to this presence. Folklore from Appalachian mining communities speaks of an entity miners called the Follower, a presence that would appear before disasters, seen only by those destined to perish. Some believed it to be a guardian spirit leading souls to the afterlife. Others considered it something more malevolent, a harbinger that fed on impending death. Most unsettling is the recent discovery that the photographic paper contains coal dust embedded within its emulsion, not merely on its surface but actually incorporated into the photographic medium itself. This suggests the photograph was developed using materials from the very mine where these men met their end. The question remains, who would go to such elaborate lengths to create this image? And what became of the photographer who, by necessity, would have had to spend considerable time in close proximity to 8 corpses, carefully positioning them to create the illusion of life? Our investigation led us to Marjorie Thayer, age 97, the last living person with direct familial connections to the Mercy Shaft incident. Residing in a nursing home 60 miles from Coleridge, her mind remains remarkably lucid despite her advanced years. My grandfather wouldn't speak of what happened after the collapse, she told us, her gnarled fingers tracing the outline of the miners in our copy of the photograph. He was one of the rescuers who went down after the initial cave-in. The company declared the men unreachable after 3 days, but my grandfather and 6 others kept digging in secret. According to Marjorie, the unofficial rescue party worked for 11 nights, entering through an abandoned ventilation shaft. On the 12th night, they breached the collapsed tunnel and found the trapped miners. They were already gone, she whispered. But grandfather said they looked peaceful, sitting in a circle as if they were just resting between shifts, all except for the foreman, who they found standing deeper in the tunnel, facing the darkness. What makes her testimony chilling is that historical records show the official rescue attempt never penetrated beyond the initial collapse. The company claimed the tunnel was too unstable to proceed, yet somehow these bodies were not only reached, but subsequently arranged and photographed above ground. The photograph bears an almost imperceptible maker's mark, nearly erased by time. Digital enhancement revealed it as belonging to Silas Heffer, an itinerant photographer who traveled through mining communities in the 1880s. Records show Heffer disappeared in March 1886, approximately 4 weeks after the Mercy Shaft collapse. His equipment was discovered abandoned in a boarding house, but the man himself was never found. The landlady's statement to local authorities, preserved in county archives, mentions Heffer's strange behavior in his final days. He wouldn't sleep, said they were calling him back to finish their portrait, said he left someone in the dark. Metallurgical analysis of the photograph's preserved frame yielded another discovery. The simple wooden frame contains trace amounts of a silver alloy with an unusual composition matching silver, extracted specifically from the Mercy Shaft, a unique geological signature documented in mining company assay reports. Most disturbing was our discovery in the church records of nearby St. Clement's Parish. The Registry of Burials lists 8 miners interred on February 18, 1886, 2 weeks after the collapse. Yet the official company record maintains that only 3 bodies were recovered. The parish record includes a curious notation beside these entries: "Returned to the light, committed to the Lord." The handwriting differs from the standard clerical script used throughout the rest of the registry. We consulted Dr. Amelia Parsons, cultural anthropologist specializing in 19th century death rituals, who offered this perspective. Post-mortem photography was common practice in that era, but typically portrayed the deceased as if sleeping. This standing arrangement is highly unusual and suggests a specific cultural or spiritual purpose beyond commemoration. When asked about the ninth figure, Marjorie Thayer became visibly distressed. Grandfather would only say they found something down there with the men, something that followed them back up. She refused to elaborate further, but before our departure pressed a small object into my palm, a coal miner's tag, number 9, its surface covered with symbols no mining historian has been able to identify. The mystery deepened when local authorities granted us rare access to the remaining Mercy Shaft records following our broadcast. Among fragile payroll ledgers and accident reports, we discovered a tattered envelope containing a letter never sent to the mining company's headquarters. Dated February 5, 1886, 2 days after the collapse, it was written by the mine supervisor, Harold Crane. The recovery effort has been compromised by what the men are reporting from below. 3 rescue workers have refused to re-enter the mine, claiming they heard singing from beyond the collapse. Those who ventured deepest return disoriented, insisting they've seen lantern light where none should exist. Most troubling is Winter's account. He swears he glimpsed all 8 missing men standing together at the furthest reach of the debris, though no passage exists that could have allowed them to gather there. The letter continues with a chilling postscript. I myself descended at dusk. The air grows strange beyond the second chamber. I observe no men, but something moves in the darkness that does not disturb the dust on the ground. The company must send someone to investigate what we've unearthed in the new southeast tunnel. I believe it may relate to the peculiar minerals found last month. This reference sent us searching through geological surveys from 1885. The Coleridge Mining Company had indeed documented an unusual vein of coal interspersed with an unidentified silvery ore, the same composition found in our photograph's frame. Company geologists noted this vein extended precisely beneath an ancient burial ground the miners had been ordered to excavate through. We located Edison Hargrove, a geology professor whose grandfather worked neighboring mines during that period. From his family archive, he produced a miner's journal containing a passage about the Mercy Shaft dated January 28, 1886, just days before the collapse. Carmichael claims the walls are whispering in the new tunnel. The foreman threatened to sack anyone speaking of it, but we've all heard it, like voices calling our names from inside solid rock. Young Davies swears something followed him to the surface yesterday. Said he felt breath on his neck all the way home, but nothing was there. The new silver ore burns cold when touched. Preacher says we've disturbed something not meant for Christian men to find. Most revealing was our discovery in parish death records. The 8 miners supposedly buried on February 18th were exhumed just 3 days later under orders from the mining company. The reason stated, medical examination. Yet county medical records show no such examinations occurred. The reburial entry is signed not by the parish priest, but by photographer Silas Heffer. When we brought these findings to Marjorie Thayer, she finally shared her grandfather's journal, which she'd previously withheld. His final entry, dated March 2, 1886, reads, Heffer completed what he called their final ascension yesterday, said the portrait would allow them passage if their likeness could stand in the light. He spoke of the 9th one permitting their return above ground through his art. I watched him carry his camera into the sealed mine last night. We heard the flash powder ignite from outside. No one has gone in after him. No one will. The photograph's disturbing influence extended beyond our investigation. 3 weeks after our initial broadcast, viewers began sending accounts of unusual experiences after seeing the image. Some reported dreams of descending into narrow tunnels. Others claimed to hear tapping sounds within their walls. Most troubling were the 7 individuals who independently described seeing the same figure, tall and elongated, standing in hallway shadows. We consulted Dr. Vanessa Morton, parapsychologist at Westridge University. Mass suggestion can explain some reactions, but not the consistency of these reports, particularly the details nobody mentioned in your broadcast. The 9th figure's elongated fingers, for instance, described identically by viewers across 5 states who couldn't possibly have communicated. Our producer insisted we discontinue displaying the photograph. The night after that decision, our studio experienced an unexplained power failure. When emergency systems activated, security cameras captured a momentary image. 8 figures standing in perfect formation in the empty studio, facing our broadcasting equipment. I returned to Coleridge to examine town records predating the mine's establishment. In 1879, surveyor William Thornton documented unusual stone formations suggesting artificial construction beneath the area later excavated for the Mercy Shaft. His report mentions curious pictographic warnings carved into rock faces of considerable antiquity. The mining company purchased these surveys but sealed them from public view. A local historian, Rebecca Hollins, provided access to her great-grandmother's journals. As a child in 1877, she wrote of the standing men visible at night near the future mine site. Mother forbids us from counting them. She says the last one isn't like the others. It only pretends. The mining company's confidential correspondence, recently declassified, reveals executives knew the southeast tunnel intersected what indigenous accounts called the waiting place, a natural chamber believed to serve as boundary between worlds. Company geologist Frederick Lampman warned against disturbing certain rock formations, describing them as possible ceremonial structures of unknown purpose. Most significant was our discovery in Silas Heffer's recovered personal effects. A technical journal detailing his photographic experiments includes entries about incorporating unusual minerals into his development chemicals. The final pages contain increasingly frantic notations about sympathetic transmissions and the silver that remembers. His last coherent entry. They stand between worlds now, neither in darkness nor light. The 9th one taught me how the silver can bridge the divide. The image creates the pathway. They need only witnesses to complete their emergence. Each eye that beholds them strengthens their foothold in our realm. We've arranged carbon dating of the photograph's paper substrate next week. Preliminary spectroscopic analysis has detected anomalies that defy explanation. Portions of the image appear to contain chemical compounds not consistent with 19th century photographic processes. Most disturbing is what we discovered when examining the original glass plate negative found in the Historical Society's basement storage. The negative shows only 7 miners. In the photographic print, there are 8. The 8th miner, standing at the far right with a pickaxe resting on his shoulder, exists solely in the positive image. I've begun noticing a persistent shadow in my peripheral vision. The technician who handled the negative reports the same phenomenon. Neither of us can clearly remember the face of the 8th miner, though we've studied the photograph for weeks. The archival work had left my eyes strained, my mind cluttered with fragments of a story that refused coherent assembly. I needed perspective, so I traveled to the abandoned Mercy Shaft site, now overgrown and marked only by a weathered state historical plaque that mentioned nothing of its true history. The entrance had been dynamited closed in 1910, but subsidence had created a depression in the earth that followed the mine's main tunnel. Standing at its edge as dusk approached, I felt a peculiar vibration through the soles of my boots. Not the distant rumble of machinery, but something rhythmic, almost deliberate. My recording equipment detected infrasound waves emanating from the sealed mine, frequencies just below human hearing that nonetheless affect the inner ear and limbic system. These same frequencies have been documented at sites of alleged supernatural activity worldwide, often attributed to geological pressure or wind through narrow spaces. Yet there was no wind that evening. I'd brought a copy of the photograph, not the original, thankfully. Comparing the terrain before me with the background details, I realized something overlooked in our analysis. The miners weren't positioned at the main entrance where the historical plaque now stood. They were standing before a secondary entrance, one not documented in any official mining records. Following the depression's curve eastward, I discovered a narrow ravine concealed by thorn bushes. At its end, partially collapsed but still discernible, was a small tunnel entrance. Local indigenous traditions identified this specific hillside as the thin place, where barriers between worlds grow permeable during certain celestial alignments. A review of astronomical data confirmed that February 18, 1886, the date of the miner's initial burial, coincided with a rare conjunction of planets visible directly above this spot. This same configuration would occur again in 4 days' time. Upon returning to my hotel room, I found a package waiting. Analysis results from the photograph's glass plate negative. The silver emulsion contained microscopic crystalline structures inconsistent with known photographic chemistry. More disturbing, these structures were still changing, rearranging themselves imperceptibly when viewed under continuous microscopic observation. The photograph wasn't merely a record of something that happened, it was an ongoing event. The Journal of Silas Heffer contained references to the silver path and stepping through reflections. I consulted Dr. Miriam Castillo, whose research into 19th century spiritualist photography documented cases where practitioners believed certain mineral combinations could capture more than mere images. They could create doorways. The history of photography is intertwined with superstition, she explained. Early photographers were often viewed as practitioners of a form of magic, capturing souls or essences. Some actively cultivated this mystique. Heffer's techniques appear to incorporate elements of both established photographic chemistry and ritualistic practices derived from multiple traditions. Most compelling was her translation of symbols etched into the 9th miner's tag Marjorie had given me. They weren't mining notations, but fragments of an ancient warning. That which waits below cannot enter unless invited through reflections. I've disconnected all recording devices in my residence. I've covered all mirrors, removed all glass. The photograph itself remains secured in a lead-lined container at the university. Tomorrow night marks the celestial alignment. I've assembled a team to explore the secondary entrance against the urgent warnings of Marjorie Thayer, whose final message simply read, "They still need one more to complete their number." The celestial alignment arrived with unsettling punctuality. Despite my precautions, the lead-lined containers, the absence of reflective surfaces in my home, I felt watched as I assembled our expedition team. 4 researchers, 2 mining engineers, and a local guide named Howell, whose family had avoided the Coleridge mines for generations. My granddaddy called it the collector's door, Howell explained as we approached the secondary entrance at dusk. Said it was opened long before the mining company came. Said some doors are meant to stay closed. We documented everything with analog equipment only. No digital technology that might be compromised. The engineers confirmed the tunnel shouldn't have remained intact after so many decades, yet it stood firm, its support beams showing none of the expected deterioration. 50 yards in, our compasses began rotating continuously. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a span of 10 feet. The walls transitioned from expected coal seams to a peculiar silvery striation that reflected our lantern light with unsettling intensity. "This mineral composition doesn't make geological sense," whispered Dr. Kepler, our geologist, scraping a small sample into a vial. "These strata should be separated by millions of years of formation." The passage widened into a chamber absent from all mining company records. 8 mining helmets sat arranged in a perfect circle. At the chamber's center stood a photographer's tripod, its wooden legs warped but still upright, pointing toward a smooth rock wall that resembled a canvas or a screen. Dr. Kepler's sample vial began to vibrate in her pocket. When extracted, the silvery mineral had rearranged itself into a perfect miniature representation of the photograph's frame. Our most significant discovery came when we directed ultraviolet light at the chamber wall. Previously invisible markings appeared, the same composition formula from Heffer's journal, alongside a crude rendering of 9 figures holding hands. "It's not a photograph," realized our photographic historian. "It's a portal." Heffer didn't preserve their image, he preserved their passage. A deep rumbling began as the celestial alignment reached its apex above. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, not from structural instability, but rhythmic vibration, like footsteps above a floor. Howell dropped his lantern, plunging us into momentary darkness. When emergency lights activated, he was staring at the wall, transfixed. "I see them," he whispered. "They're walking toward us through the silver." I saw nothing on the wall's surface, but our recording equipment captured distinct temperature variations. 8 cold spots in a line, moving toward the chamber entrance, and behind them, a 9th, significantly larger thermal anomaly. We retreated, equipment failing as we fled. Outside, under the aligned planets, Howell collapsed, gasping about "the 9th one, touching his face. By morning, he had no recollection of our expedition, but asked repeatedly about mining jobs at the Mercy Shaft. Most disturbing was the discovery in our developed film. Every photograph of the chamber wall showed 8 miners standing within our expedition group, integrated among us as if they had always been there. In each successive image, they stood closer to the camera, and in the final frame, they were facing it, looking out at whoever might view the photograph next. The photographs spread despite our containment efforts. Collectors traded digital copies across obscure forums. A subreddit dedicated to the images gained 20,000 subscribers before being quarantined. Reports accumulated of viewers experiencing identical phenomena: the smell of coal dust from their screens, tapping sounds from inside walls, and a tall figure glimpsed in reflective surfaces. I've begun receiving letters from strangers containing fragments of miners' tags, each bearing the number 9. The handwriting varies, but the message remains consistent. I saw him standing behind you. The university's analysis of Dr. Kepler's mineral sample yielded impossible results. The composition shifts when unobserved, and specimens placed near photographic equipment spontaneously arrange themselves into recognizable patterns, geometric at first, then increasingly organic. Researchers reported hearing whispered counting from sealed laboratory chambers where samples were stored. Most alarming was my discovery upon reviewing our expedition footage frame by frame. In sequential images, members of our team appear to be gradually replaced. Subtle shifts in posture and expression transform them until, in the final frames, they're standing unnaturally straight, tools gripped in rigor-fixed hands, eyes vacant yet somehow expectant. I no longer trust my own documentation. The members of our expedition team have stopped responding to my calls. Their social media accounts remain active, posting ordinary content, but something in their smiling photographs seems rehearsed, performed by entities who've studied human behavior but don't fully comprehend it. Yesterday, I visited the university archive to examine the original photograph one final time. The archivist seemed confused by my request, insisting no such item had ever been cataloged. The lead-lined box contained only a small hand mirror, its surface clouded with what appeared to be coal dust. The Historical Society's records now show no trace of the Mercy Shaft disaster. When I called Marjorie Thayer's nursing home, they had no record of her residency. The building that housed our broadcast studio now contains a photography museum that, according to local records, has occupied that location since 1892. Reality itself seems to be reforming around these images. Or perhaps the truth is more terrifying, that what we perceive as reality has always been as malleable as silver emulsion under a developer's touch. This morning, I counted the figures in my bathroom mirror. There were 8 miners standing behind me, their faces now as familiar as old friends. They no longer appear dead to me, merely patient, waiting. I understand now what the 9th figure requires, not just witnesses, but a chronicler. Someone to develop the final image, to complete the silver pathway. The tap at my door just now was not unexpected. Through the peephole, I see Silas Heffer, his ancient camera balanced on a tripod. His smile suggests he remembers me, though we've never met in this version of history. He's brought my mining helmet and tag. I will join them in the final portrait. The silver pathway requires 9 to complete its circuit. This transmission will be my last as the person you've known. When you see our photograph, and you will see it, know that I am standing 4th from the left, pickaxe resting across my shoulders, eyes fixed on yours through the glass. Count us if you must. But remember, the 9th one is always watching back. We discovered something unsettling about those who viewed the photographs extensively. Medical examinations of 7 frequent viewers revealed coal dust in their lung tissue, despite none having mining exposure. 3 reported waking with dirt-crusted fingernails as if they'd been digging while unconscious. A university student who analyzed the images for her thesis was found sleepwalking in her basement, scratching at the foundation wall. The mineral samples have begun affecting nearby technology. Devices stored in the same laboratory demonstrate peculiar glitches, screens momentarily displaying what appears to be tunnel footage, audio recordings capturing distant pickaxe strikes. Most concerning was the laboratory assistant who left her phone beside a sample overnight. By morning, her photo gallery contained 8 new images she never took, each showing the same mining crew from slightly different angles. I've been documenting these effects meticulously, though I question if my records will persist as reality continues its subtle transformations. Street names in Coleridge have changed on official maps. The town's founding date has shifted backward by 17 years. Elderly residents now casually reference the Mercy Day tribute, as if it's always been an annual tradition where townsfolk stand in formation at sunset. While examining 19th century census records, I found a disturbing inconsistency. The miners' names now appear in records dated 1887, a full year after the disaster. Their occupations are listed identically, their addresses unchanged. Only a small notation distinguishes them. Service continues below. The celestial configuration that aligned above the mine persists unnaturally. Astronomers are baffled by what they're calling a localized gravitational anomaly, holding specific stars in fixed position relative to the Coleridge Valley. The night sky above the sealed mine entrance has remained unchanged for 16 consecutive nights, defying cosmic mechanics. I visited the town cemetery yesterday. The miners' graves, which historical photographs clearly showed arranged in a row, now form a circle around an unmarked central plot. Fresh footprints lead away from this arrangement each morning, despite the caretaker's insistence that the gates remain locked after sundown. My reflection has begun behaving oddly. There's a delay, barely perceptible, between my movements and its response. Sometimes it continues moving after I've stopped. This morning, I noticed coal dust on my reflection's hands while my own remained clean. The photographs have evolved. Images previously showing 8 miners now reveal only 7. The 8th figure has vanished from the prints while becoming increasingly visible in reflective surfaces near where the photographs are displayed. Viewers report seeing him standing just behind them, his face becoming clearer with each appearance. I've received a package containing Silas Heffer's camera, though I never requested it. The university has no record of sending it. The ancient Bellows camera arrived with a note in handwriting identical to my own. The 9th stands empty. Complete the circuit. The silver pathway isn't merely a passage for them to emerge, it's an exchange. For them to fully cross over, something must take their place in the darkness. 8 miners, 1 collector, and now, 1 chronicler. When I look through Heffer's viewfinder, I don't see what's before the lens. I see the chamber we discovered, but from the other side, looking out. When we exhausted the conventional methods of investigation, I sought out Dr. Solomon Reed, an expert in photosensitive mineral compounds whose research had been largely dismissed by mainstream geology. Meeting in his cluttered university office, surrounded by rock specimens in lead-lined containers, I noticed he kept all mirrors covered with black cloth. "You've brought it into your perception field," he said without preamble. "The Coleridge transference, as I've termed it. I've documented 7 similar cases worldwide, silver deposits that form conditional barriers between dimensional planes." He showed me 19th century mining reports from Romania, Chile, and northern Wales, each describing silver veins with abnormal properties, each connected to incidents where deceased individuals continued to be recorded in official documents long after confirmed deaths. What we perceive as linear time is actually permeable under specific conditions, Reed explained. The silver in the Mercy shaft wasn't simply a mineral, but a membrane between states of existence. When punctured by the miners, it created what I call a resonance echo, beings caught between dimensions, seeking embodiment. Reed's grandfather had worked for the company that acquired Coleridge Mining's assets in 1927. Among the transferred documents, he'd discovered spectroscopic analyses of the silver ore that showed impossible properties. Light passing through it emerged with wavelengths that don't exist in our visual spectrum. "The photographer didn't create a portal," Reed said, examining Heffer's camera with gloved hands. "He documented one that already existed, but his technique, incorporating the mineral into his development process, strengthened it. Every viewing reinforces the passage. Every reflection widens it." Most disturbing was Reed's collection of census records from mining communities worldwide. In each location where similar mineral compositions were found, population records showed statistical impossibilities. People who continued appearing in consecutive censuses despite death certificates, property transfers that reverted without legal proceedings, entire family lines that mathematically couldn't exist based on birth and death records. They're being replaced, he whispered. Not just in photographs, but in reality's official record. The more we observe and document the phenomenon, the more we validate their existence in our plane. Reed had developed a detection method using polarized light passed through solutions containing trace minerals from these sites. When applied to archival photographs from Coleridge, hidden images appeared, overlays showing the same 8 miners standing among crowds at town events decades after their deaths, their features growing more solid with each passing year. The ninth entity isn't collecting them, Reed concluded. It's using them as anchors to collect us. Each person who studies the case, each witness who acknowledges the phenomenon, creates another potential vessel. Before I left, Reed handed me a sealed envelope. If you find yourself counting 8 reflections instead of 7, open this. It contains a solution of silver nitrate with an electromagnetic charge reversed from the Coleridge samples. It won't save you, but it might send whatever occupies your place back to its original position. That night, I dreamed of standing in formation with 7 others, our backs to a silver wall facing a camera. Behind the lens wasn't Heifer, but the elongated figure, its fingers adjusting the focus with methodical precision. In the dream, I realized we weren't being photographed. We were being developed. I've received the latest test results from the university laboratory, where the photographic plates and mineral samples are being stored. Dr. Eliza Contreras reports that the silver composition has developed unusual conductive properties. When connected to electrical current, the samples emit radiation in patterns matching human brainwave frequencies, specifically those associated with deep REM sleep. It's as if the mineral itself is dreaming, she explained during our call, her voice tight with professional restraint, barely masking fear. More concerning is what we found in the atmospheric testing within the sealed container. The air around the samples contains carbon dioxide, methane, and trace particles consistent with human exhalation. The samples are breathing. Last night I conducted an experiment based on Dr. Reed's theories about the silver pathway. Using a series of mirrors arranged in decreasing size, I created what Reed called a diminishing reflection corridor. According to his notes, such an arrangement might allow communication across the barrier without risking complete transference. At exactly 3:17 in the morning, the timestamp present on all recovered photographs of the miners, I positioned myself at the end of this corridor and whispered a single question. What do you need from us? The recording equipment captured no response, but when replaying the audio this morning, I discovered something in the background. Beneath the white noise, a voice repeats a sequence of words: light, witness, return, exchange. More disturbing was what I found when reviewing the video footage. My reflection in the final mirror doesn't match my recorded movements. While the camera shows me sitting motionless after asking my question, the reflection rises slightly, leaning forward as if to listen more closely to something beyond the glass. The university archives yielded another connection I'd previously overlooked. Silas Heifer's photographic chemicals were supplied by Westmoreland Chemical Company, which operated a single factory in eastern Pennsylvania. Company records show they sourced their silver nitrate from one supplier exclusively, the Coleridge Mining Company. This creates a closed loop of causality. The same silver extracted from where the miners died was used to create the chemical emulsion that captured their images after death. The photograph wasn't just of them. It was materially composed of the very substance that formed the boundary they were attempting to cross. I visited the nursing home where we originally met Marjorie Thayer, bringing photographs of the woman I remembered. The staff insisted no such resident had ever lived there, but an elderly janitor paused while examining the image. "That looks like old Miss Crane," he said. "Harold Crane's daughter. She used to visit, bringing those little tags to residents. Said they were protection. She hasn't come around since the mirror incident." When pressed about this incident, he described an evening when all mirrors in the facility's east wing cracked simultaneously. Maintenance records confirm this event occurred exactly 1 year ago, the day before I first viewed the miner photograph. The silver pathway isn't opening. It's already open and has been for generations. We haven't been investigating a phenomenon. We've been participating in it. I've arranged a meeting with Jared Thayer, Marjorie's nephew, who works as a telecommunications engineer. When I mentioned the mirror incident, his professional demeanor cracked. Aunt Marjorie warned us all to cover our reflective surfaces that week, he explained, hands trembling slightly as he sipped his coffee. I thought it was dementia talking, until my team was called to investigate service disruptions across 3 counties. The disruptions, he revealed, affected only devices with screens or reflective components. Thousands of phones displayed the same interference pattern, what technicians initially dismissed as standard static. When Jared analyzed the pattern, he discovered it contained a repeating sequence of 8 distinct waveforms, followed by a 9th of significantly longer duration. The strangest part was the timing, he continued. The interference peaked at 3:17, both AM and PM, every day for a week. Then it stopped completely when the mirrors at the nursing home shattered. Jared's company had mapped the signal disruption. When overlaid with geological surveys, the pattern formed a perfect outline of the old mining tunnel system, including passages that appeared on no official maps. Whatever caused this wasn't broadcasting outward from a source, Jared explained, showing me the technical readouts. It was transmitting inward from the perimeter, like something was trying to contain whatever was in those tunnels. This revelation led me to Professor Harriet Young, who studies electromagnetic phenomena at the State University. For 20 years, she's been documenting unusual radio frequencies emanating from abandoned mining regions worldwide. These signals shouldn't exist, she explained, showing me waveform printouts spanning decades. They operate at frequencies that penetrate solid matter while maintaining coherent patterns, something our current technology can't achieve. Her most remarkable discovery came when she converted these signals to visual patterns through spectrographic analysis. The resulting images showed humanoid figures standing in formation. I always assumed it was pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data, she admitted. But after you contacted me, I compared my recordings with the pattern from the Coleridge photographs. The match was undeniable. The same 8 figures appeared in both the century-old photograph and in radio transmissions recorded last week. Most compelling was her theory about the 9th figure. In communications theory, we have something called a carrier wave, a signal that transports the information of other signals. This 9th pattern has all the characteristics of a carrier wave, but impossibly complex. Before leaving, Professor Young showed me something she'd never shared publicly, a journal kept by her great-grandfather, who had worked as a telegraph operator in Coleridge. His final entry, dated March 5, 1886, described telegraph machines activating without operators, tapping out the same message repeatedly. We stand at the boundary stop, silver path. Complete stop, exchange initiated. Stop 9 becomes 1 stop, 1 becomes 9 stop. The transmission originated from the telegraph office nearest the Mercy shaft, 3 days after Silas Heffer disappeared into the mine with his camera. The dreams began exactly 17 days after our last expedition to the mine entrance. Not ordinary nightmares, but shared visions reported independently by everyone who had handled the photographs or mineral samples. We found ourselves walking in single file through silver-veined tunnels that descended far deeper than any human mining operation could possibly reach. In these dreams, we're always led by a figure carrying a lantern that casts no light. Though we never see its face, we follow willingly, drawn by an inexplicable sense of homecoming. Most disturbing is the sensation that accompanies these visions, not fear, but profound relief, as though a burden we've carried our entire lives is being lifted. I've established a registry of affected individuals. 37 people across 6 countries now report identical dream experiences. All had direct or indirect exposure to images from our investigation. The pattern of spread matches perfectly with the viewing history of our documentary materials. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neurologist specializing in shared psychosis, has been monitoring the brain activity of 5 affected subjects during sleep. Her findings defy medical understanding. Their brains are synchronizing across vast distances, she explained, spreading EEG readouts before me. Despite being in different time zones, their REM cycles align perfectly at 3:17 each morning. More concerning is this pattern in the temporal lobe. It's consistent with memory formation, not dream activity. These aren't dreams they're experiencing. Their brains believe these are actual events being encoded as memories. When comparing historical records with town census data, I discovered another pattern too precise to be coincidental. For every appearance of a miner's image in public records after his death, a different citizen disappeared from those same records. Complete erasure, not just deaths, but retroactive removal, as if they had never existed. The mining company's private correspondence reveals they understood something of what they'd encountered. A letter from the company president to an unnamed consultant, dated April 1886, refers to the exchange principle and sacrificial substitution. Most chilling was his concluding question. If we provide it with regular replacements, can the process be controlled for commercial advantage? I've been systematically destroying reflective surfaces in my home, but the reflections find new places to appear. Puddles after rain, polished metal, even the screen of my phone. Yesterday, I noticed my shadow detaching slightly from my movements, maintaining positions I had already shifted from. The miner's tag Marjorie gave me has begun to transform. The metal grows warmer each day, and the enigmatic symbols are rearranging themselves into recognizable letters. This morning, they spelled a single word: soon. I can no longer trust my own documentation. Pages in my research journal change between readings. Photographs show configurations I don't remember taking. Voice recordings contain conversations I have no memory of participating in. Most troubling is what we found when comparing current photographs of expedition members with images taken before our investigation. Subtle changes have appeared. A slight shift in facial structure, altered vocal patterns, and most notably, coal dust embedded under fingernails that cannot be removed. We aren't being replaced. We're being reconstructed. The photograph has begun to physically change. When examined yesterday, the miners had shifted positions, almost imperceptibly, but measurably different from their original stance. Their faces appear more defined now, less like century-old imagery and more like portraits taken with modern equipment. The background, meanwhile, has faded to near obscurity, as though the tunnel entrance is retreating while the figures step forward. I've spoken with Dr. Matheson at the quantum physics department about Reed's dimensional membrane theory. She explained that certain crystalline structures can exist in quantum superposition, simultaneously present in multiple dimensional states. When I mentioned the silver from Coleridge, she grew unnervingly quiet before asking how I'd heard about the resonance material. It seems the university has been studying samples of similar composition since the 1960s, classified under military contract. Matheson wouldn't elaborate but warned me to discontinue my investigation immediately. As I left her office, she whispered, "They're not crossing over. They're waking up." The town of Coleridge itself appears to be physically changing. Buildings I've photographed repeatedly now show architectural differences when compared with my earlier documentation. The church steeple has rotated 15 degrees clockwise. The Historical Society building has gained an additional floor that longtime employees insist has always been there. Most disturbing is the cemetery transformation. The circular arrangement of graves has begun to emit a faint luminescence at night, visible only in photographs. Spectroscopic analysis shows the light matches exactly the wavelength emitted by the silver samples in the laboratory. I've interviewed 3 former miners who worked the region's last operational coal seam before it closed in 1972. All 3 described encountering the standing men in deeper tunnels, figures observed in peripheral vision who vanished when directly approached. Company policy required immediate reassignment of any miner reporting such sightings. "They weren't ghosts," insisted retired foreman Samuel Weathers. "Ghosts are echoes. These were waiting, always standing in formation, always watching." The company knew. They sealed those tunnels, not because the coal ran out, but because the shift change was approaching. I've discovered references in the mining company's sealed records to operational continuity rituals performed annually between 1887 and 1954. These involved company executives positioning themselves in specific formations while holding mining implements, photographed by specially appointed company photographers using custom chemical processes. The final such photograph, taken in 1954, shows 9 executives. Historical records confirm that all 9 disappeared during a mine inspection the following day. The case remains officially unsolved. The company ceased all mining operations in the southeast tunnels the same week. Last night, I woke at precisely 3:17 to find coal dust covering my bedroom floor in a perfect circle. Within it were footprints leading from my mirror to my bed and back, not approaching me, but departing. When I checked the mirror, my reflection raised its finger to its lips before I consciously made the gesture. I'm no longer documenting this investigation. I fear I'm becoming part of it. The photograph has completed its transformation. Where once 8 figures stood in sepia tones, now only empty space remains, a perfect silhouette of absence against the mine entrance. The glass itself remains intact, but the silver emulsion has vanished entirely, leaving transparent gaps in the precise shapes of men. I've received 17 messages from expedition members in the past hour. Each contains the same 5 words. We stand ready. Count again. None of my responses have been answered. When I called Jared Thayer, a voice I recognized as his spoke with measured precision, asking if I'd prepared the final frame. The call disconnected before I could respond. Dr. Contreras hasn't been seen at the laboratory for 3 days. Her assistant reports that the mineral samples are now arranged in a perfect circle inside their containment unit, though no one has opened the chamber. Security footage shows only static during the periods when movement must have occurred. This morning I found a camera on my doorstep, not Heffer's antique device, but a modern digital camera with a single modification. The viewing screen has been replaced with a polished plate of silver-veined stone from the Mercy shaft. When powered on, it displays not what the lens sees, but a live feed of the underground chamber we discovered. 8 miners now stand in formation there, their features sharper and more vital than in any previous image. They're looking directly into the camera, waiting. The 9th position in their formation remains empty. Professor Jung called with remarkable news. The electromagnetic emissions have synchronized globally. Every affected site worldwide is broadcasting the same frequency pattern simultaneously. When translated into audio, the pattern forms a counting sequence in multiple languages, all ending at 8. I understand now what the collector requires, not just 9 individuals to complete its gathering, but 9 realities to complete its emergence. Each miner represents a version of our world slightly out of phase with our own. The photographic process didn't merely capture their images, it captured divergent timelines where each man survived while something else perished. The silver pathway isn't for their crossing, it's for the realignment of possibilities. Reed's sealed envelope contained not just the reversed silver solution, but a handwritten confession. His grandfather wasn't merely an employee who acquired the mining records. He was the company photographer who took the final executive portrait in 1954. The note concludes, the exchange has been attempted 8 times, 8 failures. The collector cannot fully manifest until all reflections align. You must break the sequence or become part of it. I've prepared Reed's solution and loaded it into a modified flash attachment for Heffer's camera. Tonight at 3:17 I will stand before the arranged mirrors with both cameras, Heffer's antique device, and the modified digital one. When the miners appear in my reflection, I will capture 2 images simultaneously. Their emergence through the silver pathway and their dissolution through Reed's reversed solution. The 9th position will remain empty. The circuit will remain broken. As I write these final notes, I notice coal dust forming patterns on my desk. Not random settling, but deliberate script. It reads, the 9th already stands among you. The modified camera feels unnaturally heavy in my hands as I prepare for tonight's confrontation. I've arranged the mirrors in the precise diminishing sequence that Reed's notes indicated would focus the silver pathway rather than disperse it. His solution glows with a faint blue luminescence in the retrofitted flash attachment. The reversed polarity of the Mercy shaft silver suspended in a medium he claimed could reflect back what seeks to emerge. As 3:17 approaches, I notice subtle transformations throughout my home. The walls seem to breathe slightly. Dust motes hang suspended in air, neither rising nor falling. The digital display on my clock flickers between numbers that don't correspond to any recognizable time system. A knock at my door freezes my preparations. Through the peephole, I see Dr. Contreras standing motionless, her lab coat dusted with what appears to be coal residue. I remain silent. but she speaks nevertheless, her voice coming not from the hallway but from the mirrors behind me. "You misunderstand the sequence," she says, though her lips don't move. "The exchange isn't from their world to ours. It's always been the other way around." In the reflection, I see she holds a miner's tag bearing the number 9. In the hallway visible through the peephole, her hand is empty. The implications crystallize with terrible clarity. The miners never died in that collapse. They discovered something, the 9th entity, and recognized what it offered: escape from the crushing poverty and deadly conditions of their existence. They weren't victims being collected, they were applicants being accepted. Each time the photograph has been studied, each moment we've attempted to solve the mystery, we've been auditioning for the 9th position. The collector doesn't choose. We do, through our willing obsession with the impossible image. The clock strikes 3:17, and all reflective surfaces in my home simultaneously show the same image. The mining chamber where 8 figures stand in formation. The 9th position remains empty, but now I understand it isn't waiting to be filled. It's the photographer's position. The one who captures the image is already part of the formation, has always been part of it. In every reflection, Dr. Contreras steps forward, her movements synchronized across dozens of mirrored surfaces. She raises what appears to be Heffer's original camera, aiming it not at the miners, but at me. "The circuit completes when witnessed," she explains, her voice emerging from the silver solution in Reed's flash attachment. 9 becomes 1 when the 9th finally recognizes their reflection. I raise both cameras simultaneously, Heffer's antique device and the modified digital one, and face my own reflection. In the mirrors, I see not myself, but a figure that has always been there, watching from the periphery of every photograph, standing just beyond the edge of every frame we've examined. The 9th has never been missing. It's been documenting. As both shutters click, I realize too late what Reed's note truly meant. The collector isn't seeking 9 individuals. It's seeking 9 worlds. The photographic plates from Heffer's camera have begun appearing in historical archives that previously held no record of them. Curators across 3 states report discovering glass negatives in collections they've maintained for decades, insisting the items weren't cataloged until they suddenly appeared, complete with yellowed index cards dating to 1889. Each negative shows a slightly different configuration of miners. In some they number 7, in others 8. In one disturbing plate found in the basement of a Massachusetts university, 10 figures stand in formation, more than any previous documentation mentioned. When arranged chronologically by their falsified creation dates, the negatives reveal a pattern. The miners aren't simply standing, they're performing a sequence of subtle movements like frames in a motion study. Their positions shift incrementally across decades of alleged photography, describing a perfect circle that spirals inward toward the 9th position. I've consulted linguist Dr. Hannah Reeves about the tapping sounds reported by photograph viewers. Recording these knocks and analyzing them through specialized software revealed they conform to an archaic mining communication system used specifically in the Coleridge region, a dialect of underground signals distinct from standard mining codes. "They're not sending warnings," Dr. Reeves explained after translating the sequence. "They're providing instructions for assembly. The knocks describe how to construct something using silver, glass, and human observation. It's essentially a blueprint for a perceptual device." The most revealing discovery came from Marjorie Thayer's personal effects, recovered from a storage unit rented under her married name. Among family photographs and mining memorabilia, I found a journal belonging to the original rescue party leader. His final entry, dated February 20th, 1886, describes what they actually found in the collapsed tunnel. "We reached the men today. They stand together in the new chamber, arranged before a silver wall that should not exist. They do not acknowledge us. Their eyes remain fixed on something reflected in the wall's surface, something I cannot see but can feel watching me. The foreman holds what appears to be a camera, though none was brought into the mine. When asked how they survived, they speak in unison. We have been replaced. I leave this record so others might understand our choice. We will not bring them up. We will seal this tunnel and speak of it to no one. What stands before the silver is no longer the men who descended." The journal's margins contain calculations matching the astronomical alignments we've tracked. Not just the recent conjunction, but precise predictions of alignment spanning centuries forward and backward in time. These miners didn't stumble upon the ninth entity by accident. The mining company selected this specific location because something was already waiting there. Most telling was a faded company memo paperclipped to the journal's final page. Its heading reads, Project Reflection. Continued extraction through substitution. The memo outlines a procedure for harvesting from parallel resource deposits by exchanging equivalent vessels through the silver boundary. The mining operation was never primarily about coal. It was about accessing other worlds. The silver from the Mercy shaft has begun appearing in unexpected places worldwide. Museum curators report 19th century photographic plates spontaneously developing images of miners. Antique mirrors across 3 continents have started reflecting coal-dusted figures standing in formation where no one actually stands. Most alarming was the discovery at CERN's particle accelerator, where researchers found trace elements of the unique silver composition contaminating their sensor arrays, somehow integrated into equipment that hadn't been modified in years. Dr. Reed's theory about dimensional permeability wasn't merely correct, it was cautiously understated. The silver doesn't just form a membrane between realities. It serves as a recording medium, capturing impressions across multiple timelines simultaneously. What we perceived as photographs were actually windows, and what we interpreted as images were beings paused between states of existence. I've triangulated the locations of all reported phenomena related to the miners' appearances. When mapped globally, they form a geometric pattern identical to the arrangement of stars visible above the Mercy shaft on the night of the original disaster. The silver pathway isn't confined to a single location. It's a network spanning our entire world, with the mining town serving as just one node in a vast circuit. Marjorie Thayer's family records revealed her true connection to the incident. She wasn't merely the granddaughter of a rescue party member. She was the daughter of Silas Heffer himself, born 7 months after his disappearance. Her mother's journals describe how Silas emerged from the sealed mine entrance 3 days after entering it, physically unchanged, but somehow fundamentally different. He lived with her for 6 months before vanishing permanently, leaving behind only his camera and a child who would be born with eyes that reflected light in unusual ways. The mining company didn't merely discover the silver pathway, they engineered its expansion. Financial records show they funded photographic studios in 23 cities across America and Europe, supplying them with silver compounds extracted specifically from the Mercy shaft. For decades, they created a network of reflective surfaces that served as observation points for entities moving between planes of existence. I understand now why the miners appear increasingly solid with each viewing. They aren't emerging into our world. They're pulling us into theirs. Each observation strengthens their reality while weakening the boundaries of our own. The ninth figure isn't collecting miners or observers. It's collecting entire versions of reality, selecting the most viable to preserve while allowing others to fade into non-existence. The celestial alignment approaches its final configuration tomorrow night. Dr. Contreras has stopped responding to messages, but her laboratory equipment continues uploading data automatically. The silver samples are now emitting radiation patterns matching exactly the brain activity of every person who has viewed the photographs extensively, as if the mineral itself has memorized our neural pathways. The choice becomes clear. We cannot destroy the pathway, as it now exists, independently of any physical medium. Instead, I must complete the circuit on our terms. Enter the formation not as a victim, but as a counter-observer, using Reed's reversed solution to reflect back what tries to emerge. The ninth position was never meant to be filled. It's the aperture through which the collector views us all. The transmissions from the modified cameras created an unexpected bridge, not just between worlds, but between intentions. As both shutters activated simultaneously at 3:17, the silver solution in Reed's flash illuminated the chamber with a spectrum invisible to human perception, but captured perfectly on Heffer's antique plates. The developed images revealed what no previous documentation had shown. The miners weren't facing outward toward observers, but inward toward each other, their gazes fixed on the empty ninth position. What we had interpreted as a formation awaiting completion was actually a circle protecting an absence, a deliberate void maintained across multiple realities. Professor Jung's analysis of the electromagnetic emissions revealed a pattern we had fundamentally misunderstood. The counting sequence wasn't progressing toward 9, it was counting down from it. Each iteration reduced by 1, approaching 0, not completion, but dissolution. The collector doesn't want to add, her message explained. It wants to subtract until nothing remains but itself. Each reality it touches becomes less substantial. The miners weren't its servants, but its wardens, maintaining the circle that prevented it from fully manifesting. The silver pathway works both ways. Just as it allows observation across realities, it permits influence to flow between them. The miners hadn't been replacing people in our world. They had been reinforcing the boundaries the collector was systematically eroding. I understand now why the company abruptly ceased the operational continuity rituals in 1954. The executives who disappeared weren't victims. They were volunteers completing a containment protocol established by the original miners, who discovered that human consciousness could form a more resilient barrier than any physical material. Marjorie Thayer's family wasn't just keeping records, they were maintaining a vigil. The miners' tags she distributed weren't merely talismans, but components of a distributed perceptual network that strengthened reality's coherence against the collector's influence. The final proof came from Dr. Contreras, who hadn't been subsumed as I feared. Her disappearance was strategic. She had recognized the pattern and positioned herself at another node in the network, synchronizing her observations with mine to create a reinforced perceptual field. The 9th position must remain empty, her message clarified. That emptiness is not weakness, but purpose, a deliberate absence the collector cannot fill because nothingness cannot be collected. Each time we allow ourselves to perceive the miners as victims awaiting rescue, we weaken their actual purpose as guardians. The resolution crystallizes with elegant simplicity. We don't need to destroy the photographs or seal the pathways. We need only to witness correctly, to observe the miners not as subjects of our investigation, but as active participants in a containment protocol spanning centuries. I've dispatched copies of the correctly exposed plates to every location where the miners have been sighted, creating a synchronized network of accurate observation. When viewed simultaneously during tonight's celestial alignment, they won't complete a circuit but reinforce a boundary. The 9th position will remain intentionally vacant, not as invitation, but as imprisonment. Sometimes the most powerful presence is absence itself. The Mercy Shaft records have been quietly purged from every official archive, yet the miner's presence grows stronger in our collective consciousness. Last week, a kindergarten class in a town 300 miles from Coleridge drew identical pictures during free art time, 8 figures standing before a dark entrance, with an empty space where a 9th should be. None of these children had been exposed to our documentation. I've come to understand the true nature of silver's role in this phenomenon. Silver doesn't merely reflect light, but memory itself, capturing impressions across the dimensional boundary. The miners discovered that certain arrangements of consciousness, when properly reflected, could create a perpetual resonance loop, a perception cage. The collector isn't from another dimension or reality. It's something far more fundamental, a void in existence itself, a sentient absence that predates our universe. The indigenous peoples who marked the hillside as the thin place understood this entity wasn't trying to enter our world. It was already here, woven into reality's foundation. What they feared was its awakening to self-awareness. The silver veins at Coleridge represented a rare material manifestation of this entity, places where nothingness had developed a reflective boundary with existence. When the miners breached this boundary, they didn't release the collector, they provided it with its first mirror. Through that reflection, it recognized itself as separate from everything else, and began to hunger. Dr. Contreras has identified the precise wavelength emitted by the silver pathway. It matches exactly the background radiation of the void between stars, not darkness, but absence itself given measurable form. The miners weren't chosen randomly. Company records show each man had experienced near-death events before being hired, moments where their consciousness briefly touched the same void the collector inhabits. This connection allowed them to perceive what others couldn't. That reality itself is constantly being observed and gradually consumed. Their apparent deaths were actually a transition into a state of perpetual vigilance, becoming living counterweights to maintain the balance between existence and void. The ninth position was never meant for another miner or observer. It represents the aperture through which we all eventually pass. Death itself, the ultimate boundary between being and non-being. By maintaining this empty position in their formation, the miners created a controlled passage that prevents the uncontrolled erosion of our reality. I now understand my role in this centuries-long containment protocol, not as investigator or victim, but as witness, the necessary observer who keeps the miners fixed in their protective formation through the act of perception itself. The photograph wasn't evidence of something that happened, but a mechanism ensuring it continues to happen. The silver pathway remains open not because of failure but by design, a pressure valve releasing the collector's influence in measured amounts, rather than allowing it to accumulate until reality itself fractures. Our investigation didn't discover this system. It was always part of it, the latest iteration of a witness cycle established in 1886. The miners weren't trying to escape their fate. They were inviting us to share in their vigilance. The revelation that the miners serve as wardens rather than victims has transformed our investigation into something far more profound. We aren't merely documentarians, but active participants in reality's maintenance. This understanding brings both clarity and responsibility. I've established contact with 8 other researchers who independently discovered aspects of the Coleridge phenomenon across different disciplines: an astronomer tracking unusual stellar alignments, a quantum physicist studying observer effects, a folklorist documenting standing men legends worldwide. Each had encountered fragments of the same pattern without recognizing the complete design. Together, we've formed what we call the Witness Circle, a distributed network of conscious observation maintaining the miner's formation through deliberate, informed perception. We coordinate our viewing of the authentic photographs at precisely 3:17 each day, reinforcing the boundary through synchronized acknowledgement of its purpose. The effects were immediately measurable. Reports of miners appearing in reflections have ceased entirely. Instead, people describe momentary glimpses of 8 figures standing protectively around empty spaces, in puddles after rain, in darkened windows at twilight, in the chrome surfaces of everyday objects. Not approaching or threatening, but vigilant, maintaining their positions. Most significant is the transformation in Coleridge itself. The town has stabilized geographically and historically, its buildings no longer shifting position or architecture. The cemetery has returned to its original configuration, though visitors report a sense of watchfulness emanating from the grounds, not malevolent but attentive, like sentinels maintaining an eternal post. Dr. Contreras has developed what she calls perception anchors, specially treated photographic plates containing microscopic amounts of the silver solution, viewable only through custom lenses. These have been positioned at strategic locations worldwide, creating a reinforced perceptual network that distributes the observation burden beyond our immediate circle. The miners weren't trying to warn us, she explained during our last conference call. They were recruiting us. Each generation needs new witnesses as the old ones pass on. The photograph wasn't evidence. It was an invitation to participate. The long-term implications of our role remain uncertain. Are we merely the latest shift in an eternal vigil? Or can this boundary be permanently reinforced? Can the void ever truly be contained? Or is consciousness itself the only barrier against dissolution? These questions have transformed from academic puzzles into existential imperatives. I still dream of the silver tunnels, but the tone has changed. No longer am I led deeper into darkness by an unseen guide. Instead, I stand with 7 others around an empty 9th position, facing inward, our collective awareness forming a living barrier against what waits beyond perception. In these dreams, I understand that the most powerful defense against nothingness is simply to acknowledge its existence while refusing its influence. The miners weren't victims of a disaster. They were volunteers in the oldest human purpose: to witness, to remember, to maintain the boundary between being and void through the simple yet profound act of conscious observation. As long as someone remembers to look, the 9th position remains empty. And in that emptiness, everything else continues to exist. The restoration of balance through our witness circle brought unexpected consequences. The original photograph, stored in a lead-lined container at the university archive, has transformed again. When opened during the winter solstice, we found not a photograph but a piece of polished silver ore, reflective yet opaque, showing only what stands before it without embellishment or distortion. The miners' images had completely withdrawn from our reality, returning to their vigilant positions along the boundary. Marjorie Thayer's belongings yielded one final revelation. A letter from her father, Silas Heffer, written before his final disappearance. "The camera doesn't capture light," he wrote, "but perception itself. What develops isn't an image but a relationship between observer and observed. The silver remembers, daughter. It remembers being witnessed." The mining company's involvement proved more calculated than we initially understood. Corporate archives, reluctantly opened through legal pressure, revealed generations of executives aware of what lay beneath Coleridge. Their operational continuity rituals weren't superstitious practices, but calibrated reinforcements of the perceptual boundary, using human consciousness as the most effective containment technology available. Project Reflection continues under different management now. Our witness circle has expanded to 23 individuals across 17 countries, each maintaining regular observation protocols. We don't speak publicly of our work, but we recognize each other by the subtle coal dust that occasionally appears beneath our fingernails. Not a sign of infection, but of acceptance. The boundary acknowledges our service. Dr. Contreras developed a method for identifying potential witnesses, individuals whose consciousness resonates naturally with this specific frequency of the silver pathway. Interestingly, many are descendants of miners or photographers from the original Coleridge era, suggesting that certain perceptual attributes may be heritable. Consciousness passing patterns to consciousness across generations. The eighth miner was finally identified through census reconciliation. Thomas Harlow, age 23, had no living relatives in 1886. His personnel file contained a single notation: "Sees what others cannot." He was the first to report hearing voices from within the silver-veined coal and the last to be positioned in the formation. The ninth position remains empty by design. We understand now that this void isn't absence but purpose, the necessary aperture through which reality maintains its distinction from non-being. Each generation of witnesses maintains this opening not by filling it, but by acknowledging its essential emptiness. Jared Thayer now manages the telecommunications network integrating our observation protocols across continents. The subtle carrier wave emitted by our synchronized perceptions creates what he calls a cognitive firewall against the void's influence. "We're not just watching," he explains. "We're actively remembering reality into continued existence." I still visit the sealed mine entrance annually, not from investigative necessity but as acknowledgement of where understanding began. The silver pathway remains open, not as vulnerability but as monitored passage. Sometimes, standing in the twilight before the collapsed entrance, I sense 8 presences arranged around me, their vigilance spanning centuries, their formation protecting everything that exists by maintaining the boundary between being and the void that hungers for its dissolution. In the end, the miners' most profound message wasn't captured in silver and light, but in the empty space they continue to protect. The understanding that existence itself requires witnesses. After discovering our vital role in maintaining reality's boundaries, I searched for others who might have encountered the miners throughout history. This inquiry led me to a remarkable archive, personal journals from lighthouse keepers spanning 3 centuries. These solitary witnesses repeatedly described identical phenomena, 8 figures standing in formation around an empty space, visible only when light reflected off water during specific astronomical alignments. They stand guard not against what comes from the sea, but against what lies beneath perception itself, wrote Thomas Welling, keeper of North Point Light in 1842, predating the Coleridge incident by decades. His sketches precisely match our miners in posture and arrangement. More revealing was his observation that the formation appears strongest when acknowledged but unaltered. The witness must recognize their purpose without attempting to join their ranks. This explains why our synchronized observation protocols succeeded where previous interventions failed. We aren't meant to complete their number, but to maintain their configuration through conscious recognition. The miner's purpose transcends their historical context. They represent a fundamental pattern of consciousness that has manifested wherever the boundary between existence and void grows thin. Indigenous elders from 5 continents have shared creation stories featuring the standing ones, who form circles around empty centers, not to worship absence, but to contain it. The silver pathway was never confined to Coleridge. The miners simply found one manifestation of an eternal boundary that requires constant witnessing. Their formation repeats throughout human history, in prehistoric cave paintings, medieval cathedral designs, atomic structures, and neural networks, a pattern so fundamental to existence that consciousness instinctively reproduces it. Dr. Contreras discovered the pattern's mathematical expression while monitoring our brain activity during synchronized observation sessions. It's a conscious counterweight, she explained. The specific arrangement creates a perceptual field that reinforces reality against entropy. The miners didn't invent this formation. They recognized it as the necessary response to what they encountered. As our understanding deepened, so did our effectiveness. Witness Circle members report increasingly vivid awareness during observation sessions, not just seeing the miners, but perceiving the boundary they maintain. The void beyond remains incomprehensible, but its relationship to existence becomes clear, not as enemy but as context, the necessary absence that defines presence. I no longer fear what waits in reflective surfaces. The coal dust that occasionally appears beneath my fingernails serves as reminder, not warning. Each miner's position in the formation corresponds to a fundamental aspect of conscious perception. Their arrangement isn't merely physical, but conceptual, a living equation maintaining reality's coherence. Tomorrow marks the centennial of the original photograph's creation. Our witness circle will gather at the sealed mine entrance, not to expose or explore, but to acknowledge. We'll bring no cameras, no recording devices, only our conscious perception, the most powerful technology for maintaining the boundary between being and void. The miners stand eternal in their formation, not trapped but purposeful, and we stand with them, not as investigators but as inheritors of the most fundamental human responsibility, to witness existence itself. The journey ends where it began, with a photograph that defies conventional understanding. Today, 100 years after Silas Heffer disappeared into the Mercy Shaft, I stand before a gallery exhibition titled Reflections, the Conscious Observer. The centerpiece is not the miner's photograph itself, but a polished silver plate mounted in a simple wooden frame. Visitors approach cautiously, drawn by an inexplicable familiarity. What they see isn't 8 miners standing before a mine entrance, but themselves reflected with subtle alterations, standing slightly straighter, eyes more attentive, arranged unconsciously in the protective formation we've come to recognize as reality's guardians. The witness circle continues its quiet work across generations. We've established a foundation that identifies potential observers through subtle perceptual tests, individuals naturally attuned to the boundary frequencies. Many find us on their own, drawn by dreams of standing in formation or inexplicable coal dust appearing beneath their fingernails. The mining company's records have been permanently sealed within a silver-lined vault, accessible only to those who already understand their significance. Not to hide the truth, but to ensure it remains properly contextualized. Knowledge that must be witnessed correctly rather than merely possessed. Dr. Contreras has established observational protocols at 16 former mining sites worldwide, creating a networked perceptual field that distributes the maintenance burden across multiple nodes. The celestial alignments continue their ancient cycles, but our synchronized acknowledgement prevents any single location from becoming too thin, too vulnerable to what waits beyond. I still visit the Coleridge Cemetery monthly. The miners' graves remain arranged in their perfect circle around the empty center. Visitors often comment on feeling watched, not threatened but protected. Some instinctively avoid stepping into the circle's center, respecting an emptiness they perceive as purposeful rather than vacant. The photograph that began our investigation has fulfilled its purpose, not as evidence to be analyzed, but as invitation to participate in existence's fundamental maintenance. The miners have withdrawn from our archival materials, returning to their positions along the boundary where perception meets void. They appear now only to those who understand their vigilance, not as ghosts, but as fellow watchers. My reflection still occasionally moves independently, but no longer causes alarm. These momentary divergences simply confirm the boundary remains actively maintained, consciousness acknowledging consciousness across the silver pathway. The most profound legacy of our investigation isn't documented in any file or recording. It lives in the way we've learned to perceive, recognizing that reality itself requires witnesses to persist, that observation is not merely passive documentation, but active participation in existence's continuity. Tonight, as I prepare to retire from active field research, I place a small miner's tag beside my bed, not for protection but as acknowledgement of shared purpose. In my dreams, I stand with them in formation, facing inward toward the necessary emptiness, maintaining the boundary through the simple yet profound act of conscious witness. The void remains, as it always will, but it remains contained, acknowledged without being invited, observed without being strengthened. The ninth position stays empty by design, not awaiting completion, but preserving distinction between being and non-being. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.